Our transit only runs till 4 and does not run on Saturdays and Sundays. The lack of transit? This is huge. I would say that this is a very negative thing, and I wish we would have our own bus.
Currently, as it stands, like the bus system is, it's atrocious. I don't want to add an extra 2.5 hours to my day to get to the city and back.
In a small community, people are afraid to say anything because the supervisor is really well known and has grown up here, and employees are afraid of losing their jobs. And so instead of speaking up and trying to correct problems, people are quitting, or they're just putting up with it and are very miserable and unhappy at work.
I wish for a better economy. That's what I wish for. It's for everybody. It's not just for us. It's been really hard.
From Free Rein Associates and Life Strategies, this is the Diversity Disconnect podcast. I'm Mallory Tomlinson. Episode 4, The Transportation Paradox. Disconnect between employer expectation and rural realities. Rural living comes with many benefits.
There is a sense of community among people. So, like knowing the name of the guy or person to speak to at a particular, service agency, or like, oh, you got to talk to Tim. Yeah. And then you go down your way and you talk to Tim. Like the amount of connections that they have, like these communities, they know the people in the spaces.
And there are many reasons why folks choose to live in rural communities.
I live in a gorgeous area. It's beautiful. And I've never had like neighbors be close. Like I don't have to feel observed in my home, which I really like. There's like a sense of privacy and peacefulness when I'm home.
Yeah, I agree. The scenery and like environment is something I really do enjoy. Like just being able to like go on a walk and not see a single soul sometimes, of like just taking it all in, right? I enjoyed it growing up because like in school, it was like you grew up with these people from kindergarten and you just know all these people and you're all just kind of like one big family. The example that comes to mind for some reason is like being able to like say trust the mechanic, like because I'm someone who could easily get taken advantage of at a mechanic. Like I don't know car stuff. They show me my oil stick when I get an oil change. I'm like, cool. But like I can go there and I trust that they're honest and that they'll give me a good deal and whatever, because they've been there for so long. Like we are connected with them. We know who's in there. And it's just those like little things that you kind of take for granted.
But it also brings its own unique set of challenges.
The first very clear aspect of the experience with rural communities was that time is measured differently.
I really got a sense of the rural community that, I myself have not had. It's a different environment. Right. And I think that when we come in to rural communities and we think, oh, we've got this solution, we've got this program, we're all excited about it, or this is the quote unquote way we do this or the way we do that. And if I could just get you trained up to like do it this way, it's a disservice, right? Because there just are things that can't change, right? Like these communities are communities that don't necessarily always even have internet access, which is something that we simply take for granted. So to say, oh, you can't get employers to come to one location at a particular time physically in space, so we'll offer a webinar. Well, that just might not work for spaces that don't have connectivity. Webinar approach might not fit for Indigenous populations, for example, who, we should really be inviting into the conversation about how we structure training, right? And that takes time because we've got to build relationships and connections with them. And they don't trust us, which makes sense in a lot of circumstances. The other realities that I found beyond just that connectivity piece is, everything is not close by. So people live out on the mountains and up twisty, windy roads, and those roads get rained out or washed out or mudslides or trees fallen over top of them. Or, in BC here, we particularly have bad fire seasons, for example, that can close roads. One of the communities that we sought to engage with in this research was under a fire evacuation order or alert for the majority of the summer. Like, that's the reality of the situation. And even if they were safe and sound in their community, if we're coming up to invite them to have these discussions about, the employment equity and inclusion of people who are underrepresented, but they think in a moment's notice they might need to pack up their car or pick up their kids from school, like, we're having different conversations. Like, the priority obviously is going to be safety and security. Like, we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, that is a foundation. And people who are under evacuation alert, might not want to engage in these conversations with us when, they want to stay close to home.
And the realities of rural living, from unreliable transportation to older infrastructure to community culture, can all impact the employment success for people from underrepresented groups. But are these unique rural experiences and the challenges they bring being considered? Throughout the data collection phase, our research team heard story after story of how transportation challenges negatively impact employment success.
This one manager came in once and he says, "I wish you had transportation. It would be a lot easier to bring you back and forth." Yeah, this job site was at the very top of the hill, so I couldn't walk there and back. Plus, there's no sidewalk on the highway that's going up and downhill. I need them to provide transportation because the cabs shut down early around here and there's no bus system, nothing like that. After the shift was over, I actually heard him say to his wife, "I'm not going to hire any more people with disabilities. That's it, no more." So because there's no transit options for me, I've now ruined these job opportunities for all people with disabilities. And this guy hires every summer.
Well, we need a transportation system. We lack a transportation system, so people without driver's licenses, and this is poverty. This is disconnect from family. Not having transportation cuts you off from everything. We're also seeing young people that are unable to, they want to get their driver's license, but they don't have anybody that will teach them. And we don't have a driving school here, and to bring a driving school here costs double per student what it does in the urban centers. And there isn't really a mechanism for blanket funding for driver's licensing and testing and that kind of stuff. The other thing is the ICBC requirement to have a vehicle that's virtually perfect before they will let you take a test in it. So if you've got a crack in your windshield, even though you can drive around, you can't take the test. So you can't drive to work and earn a paycheck to fix the windshield. Like, you got a crack in your windshield. It's ridiculousness. Like, that gets in the way of young people being able to get a driver's license, people with disabilities. Sometimes they just have never been able to take the test with their anxiety, and they've taken their tests like 7 times, and then they just take themselves out of it, right? We already had a conversation with the ICBC officer over here, because they just have people sit out in the wide open and do their driver's test, and that's anxiety-inducing for some people. And so we spoke to them about, can you put them into a back office so they're considering it? But it's not something that ever came to their mind.
Not having your license limits your options, especially out in rural community like this. I have very little access to what urban centers offer. A license helps you be able to have transportation to what you want to do and where you want to go. I can't go forward in my electrical because of that.
Unless you were an employer.
Well, if you ask employers, they didn't see it as a problem. So individuals and service providers certainly saw that transportation was a key issue. We had people talking about the difficulty in public transportation, right? In one community, there was a bus and the bus driver lost the key. And so therefore, the bus isn't going to run because there's only one bus in the community. We had people speak to the fact that, licensing, getting their driver's license, and we're not talking about licenses for like truck drivers or any of those kind of things. We're talking about just people trying to drive in their communities. like there isn't driver centers in each of these rural and remote spaces. And so getting licensing can be a bit of a challenge. Indigenous groups spoke about offering driving licensing through their training on site. And that was great, but they also needed to have a qualified trainer come out. So if you couldn't get a qualified trainer, even if there were multiple people in the community that wanted to get that training, they couldn't access it because a trainer couldn't come out. And so even if there's a desire, it can be a challenge.
In their work, transportation became the ultimate symbol of the disconnect that exists between underrepresented groups and employers. When one group, in this case employees, face such a large challenge that feels outside of their control, and the other, employers, have no awareness of the barriers that it creates, how will a solution ever be found?
Employers this wasn't top of mind for them, right? They didn't think, oh, it would be, these people live in the community, so therefore they should be able to get to our workplace. And, no excuses if you're late or this or that. I mean, there's no rush hour in rural and remote communities, so that's great. But there's certainly lots of other challenges that exist there, or the ability for people to have vehicles or own vehicles that are operating, or, all of that kind of stuff. Because Lord knows if a piece goes on your car, it's not coming from the local community. It's going to come from like Chilliwack or Vancouver, even, further to bring something around. It can take some time. So that's a challenge, keeping cars up and working, basically. And employers just didn't see that as an issue. They're just operating under the assumption that people are going to be able to get to the workplace when they need to get to the workplace. And I hope that one of the outcomes of this, just the teeniest outcome of this project, would be for employers to consider what role they could play to facilitate the transportation success of employees in their area.
As we saw in episode 3, respect between job seekers, employees, and employers plays a vital role in workplace satisfaction and maintenance. As the old saying goes, people don't leave bad jobs. They leave bad management fits.
It's the people, not the place. My coworkers are just incredible, and they're on their own journey, and respecting that relationship is its own evolving dynamic.
The environment, the people. I really liked working at this one place because it's just the people were really nice. They helped me out and they guided me.
As an employer, how often do you reflect on the culture of your workplace? Creating healthy work environments is critical to the success of not just your employees, but your business as well.
So a healthy work environment is one that's going to be free of toxicity, right? Like, it's going to be a space where an individual feels open to bring their full self to work, right? Without judgment, without retribution. They feel like they're empowered to be themselves. They're empowered to grow, to challenge themselves in a safe place. That's what I see when I think of a healthy workplace. A healthy workplace also involves like workplace health and safety, right? Like, we're not asking people to put themselves in danger. Healthy workplaces are ones where individuals feel like an employer is going to stand up for them, support them. I think community spaces are not necessarily always safe for people from underrepresented groups. And that's true in workplaces as well.
Happy working environments. I think we're too afraid of the word joy or happy. When I think about health or healthy spaces, I think about people feeling peaceful, people feeling joy, people being at ease, people laughing, people being able to be themselves. And to me, that's, like a joyful environment, like a space where it's not only safe, but enjoyable.
Over his years as an employer, George has become more intentional about the work environment he creates.
And one of the things that should be considered is the hiring of a diverse workforce, because, I mean, a lot of people have different strengths and a lot of different things they bring to the table. And I think that's what contributes to a successful work environment.
He also sees his role as the employer in protecting his employees from harassment and added stress from those outside of the workplace.
I had a person who had some social anxiety challenges, and a customer that had a bad day, I think, and they really started to be aggressive verbally with this person. And that, of course, would be a trigger. So I just said, hey, you know what? I'm wondering if you could go get something from the back for me. And it was kind of their exit to go and take a break. And then I kindly told the customer, we don't do that here.
What type of work environments are underrepresented groups looking for?
The first word that comes to mind is safe.
Yes, safety.
Because as soon as you find a work environment that's able to like accommodate even just the little things, that creates a sense of safety, a sense of like, okay, this is a good environment for me to be in and exist in, because work is such a big part of your life. Like most often people are spending more time at work than they are at home with their family, friends, whatever. Mm-hmm. So like you want that environment to be able to like ebb and flow with your needs and in a way that works for you and works for the employer, and it just feels like a positive thing.
Flexible and adaptable. I think, speaking from the perspective of a person with a disability, people in my position and people with physical disabilities or limitations are very good at adapting and can sort of sort things out for themselves. I think what they're looking for is an employer who is open to that and can like hear them out and say, yeah, that's an option, and not have that rigidity of this is the way we do things. This is the way we've always done things. So it must continue to be that way, rather than like taking a step back and realizing like how small of a tweak it so often is, and how large of an impact it can have on the experience of their employee to be able to make those tweaks.
It keeps coming back down to, on the wish list, people were not asking for very much. It was very, very simple things. And so I think just having an environment that recognizes that and doesn't see it as like this, oh, well, good, now I have to deal with this, like it just makes it a much nicer environment to want to like show up for.
When Madeleine and Emily spoke about work environments in rural communities with Shane, she spoke to the unspoken layers of privilege.
In small communities, it's been privilege and the good old boys club and shoulder tapping and sort of the lack of transparency and the lack of ethical workplace standards. That is a huge challenge for people whom either identify as multi-barrier or they themselves don't know it, or they just feel a little bit outcast from this goofy group. And that's also my role, to push back on my own friends and my own community. It's just to say, hey, I really think we gotta hold some space here and have a really meaningful conversation.
And some participants, like Jordan, pondered how realistic it is to separate your work from your personal life.
It's like the black type on white paper. It's the boring book you never want to read. It doesn't leave room for bright ideas and meaningful contribution and a depth of teams and compassion and understanding. And I think it keeps teams on a very old school, I come to work, I do my job, I go home. It lacks the culture in the workplace. It doesn't match society. You become your own workplace of beige, and it doesn't match the truth.
She also looks for employers who demonstrate consistency and honesty.
One of the things companies need to keep in mind is that they need to have consistency, okay? I think it's something that needs to be addressed because it happens too many times in the workplace where you go in, you started at a new company, and they say, these are our policies and our rules, and these are the regulations. Rules and regulations and policies are set in place for a reason. They need to be followed. And I'm following them, but this person isn't. And this person isn't. But you're allowing this person to do this, and you're allowing this person to do that. Yet if I step outside of the boundaries or don't follow what you've got written down there, then I'm in trouble. But how come? Why? That inconsistency can cause a lot of bad feelings and a very tough, toxic environment to be working in. I've been in a couple environments like that, and it's horrible, and it's very difficult to stay working in a job like that.
If we had to put up a ramp or something, we probably wouldn't have the money to do it, unless there's some sort of assistance out there.
Funding needs to change. If you're going to school, you should get a living allowance of some sort, even if it's not like a huge amount. We're living in such a sad financial world.
The financial need is real, and it's becoming more and more real. We're seeing more and more homeless, and I see why, because it's becoming harder and harder for people to find work or to be able to keep work.
It's safe to say that most Canadians are experiencing different financial barriers, from gas and grocery prices to the rising cost of housing. What is unique to the challenges faced by rural communities when it comes to financial factors?
I mean, they don't have as many supports as readily available for them, and I also think there's such a focus on the cost of housing in urban and suburban spaces, that our grocery bills are high, rent is high and all that kind of stuff. But those challenges extend out into rural and remote spaces. And, frankly, the grocery bills are likely higher in rural and remote spaces. You look at challenges with costing of homes, for example, right? And I remember we were driving through, BC, and there's just these acreages, and that's all great. And I wonder how much money that cost. Well, that's not accessible housing, right? Like that ranch, that acreage is not like actually going to house 100 people. That space is never going to be low-income housing, right? And in urban and suburban spaces, you're going to get low-income housing, like dedicated space for low-income housing that you aren't necessarily going to find, even though there's so much space in the communities. I also think it's important to consider, like, on Indigenous lands, the challenges that they have in terms of funding and like access to water and how tied they are to, federal interest or ability to solve those problems. And that's the interaction between Indigenous lands and government to just get basic shelter, housing, food, water, like the infrastructures that we take for granted. Like, I don't think the population understands that it actually is more of a challenge to get those systems in place on Indigenous lands, not because of Indigenous people, but because of the system and the bureaucracy that exists there.
Unfortunately, most respondents don't find the solutions being applied to these challenges factor in these uniquely rural factors, whether the solution comes from governments, the public sector, or the private sector. And when our financial needs aren't being met, even with a reliable source of income, our ability to address any other challenge in our life becomes more difficult. What's the snowball effect that can happen when someone's financial needs aren't met?
Oh, this one gets me fired up.
Do it.
It's insurmountable. It is, if you don't know that experience, it is so hard to understand just how out of control it can get. It is that cycle of poverty. I'm speaking from personal experience on this one. So let's just take, for example, if your paycheck doesn't come in on time, or it's just not enough, or something has come up and you can't afford, say, gas to fill up your car, if you're fortunate enough to even have a car, then you can't get to work, which means you're losing more pay, which then puts you at risk of losing your house. You can't buy food. You can't pay for your electricity. You can't get new clothes. You can't feel nice. You start feeling like a piece of garbage because you're not able to take care of yourself, and society is telling you that you're not worth it because you're not getting the things that you need met. And it is heartbreaking because it is so hard to come out of that. The further down, like the bigger that snowball gets, the harder it is to chip away at it and get you back to a place where you're feeling good. Because even then, you are then grappling with, say, health needs that are now coming up because you can't afford to take care of yourself, or you're dealing with different pieces of debt. You're dealing with different pieces of just things from not being able to maintain things. And it just gets harder and harder and harder because you have this now accumulation of things that you need to tackle before you can even start getting ahead.
Many of us can relate to the difficult tension that exists when you're in a less than positive employment position, but you're not in a place financially to be able to quit. For many of these research participants, this tension is amplified when you add in an employer-employee power dynamic.
We know employment standards is a thing, but that person needs that job because the mortgage needs to be paid or the rent needs to be paid. So they're often stuck in really difficult employment situations, and it's usually a multi-barrier person or a person who would say that they're diverse because of how they present.
And some systems intended to help underrepresented groups can leave them feeling trapped in a cycle.
You can only make a certain amount of money on PWD. Once you've gone past that, 22 to 24,000? You cannot do anything above 22 or 24,000, or at least my life becomes a lot more difficult and confusing if I start making more than that. They want to be supportive and ensure no one takes advantage of the system, but it's not allowing you to get out of the low income bracket. You're stuck. And now you've also got a label with different judgments and assumptions from others that come with it.
And the reality is, many people find themselves needing to sacrifice wants, passions, and enjoyment to meet the needs of their families.
There's so many things that people want to do that we think we need to do. But when it comes to work, it's your priorities have to come first. How are you going to feed your family? And how are you going to provide a roof over their head or clothes on their back? You need to sacrifice your wants over what you need in life.
And for employers who want to be accessible and create inclusive workplaces, financial barriers can feel insurmountable.
Well, if someone moves in and accessibility features are already there, then it's not hindering anything, right? The building is already accessible. And I think that it would be opening a lot of doors, right? But for small businesses like mine, where $10,000 is a lot of money, it's hard.
When speaking with service providers, financial constraints can also impact their ability to meet the needs of their community.
There's never enough resources. Yeah, I would say definitely resourcing, whether it's financial resourcing or human resourcing, which ultimately is financial, or time, all of these things. If we had more, we could cover a lot more people. But it is what it is, and we do what we can with what we get.
Community resource capacity was a common concern amongst rural residents.
I was speaking with a member of an Indigenous community, and his whole idea was that we need to pool resources. And he was talking about the fact that this country will send billions of dollars outside of itself to other countries, but where is the investment in its own people and its first people who we've stolen the land from? And so they wanted to see a pooling of funds to invest in groups of Indigenous communities and be able to share skills and knowledge and to be educated on their land or their reserves in their communities and be able to be self-sufficient in to be able to gain education and not have to leave their communities to do so.
In fact, our research team often found themselves talking to people who truly cared about the long-term success of their community as a whole. They were invested in that success. It left the team wondering, if the financial resources were there, what all could these communities accomplish?
You know we have an accessibility committee in this town, right?
A lot of communities, particularly in rural and remote areas, have a strong desire to be inclusive and welcoming communities where everyone belongs. But as Jordan shares, sometimes our best intentions aren't adequately meeting needs.
Do you want to know where you can put your suggestions? Town hall, where you will go up 14 stairs. If you use a wheelchair, sure, there's a stair lift, but no one in that building knows how to get it to work. And that's even if you're able to grab someone to put it in operation. Or you can go to the rec center, but that's not super accessible either, especially if you don't drive. So I'm not allowed to drive. They just won't let me. And I have to take the bus, which we only have 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So if I come in the morning, then I have to find something to do for 8 hours so I can get home in the evening or take a taxi. Yeah, not accessible, right? But that's where you can go to put your suggestions.
When addressing challenges in rural communities, no matter the challenge, you must recognize and address the realities of rural living.
Well, the rural reality is that there's less employers, there's less people, there's less training, there's less resources, there's less services. Like, that's just a reality, right? And so we do have to grapple with limited resources, but lots of needs. And I think that scarcity breeds innovation. And so the participants spoke a lot to how they were wanting to make their communities better. They wanted to make their communities more inclusive spaces. They didn't want to necessarily leave, and they felt this kind of pressure to leave to achieve their goals. And I think there's a role for community service agencies, for workplaces, to do a better job keeping people in those rural spaces and bringing opportunities there. If we only give opportunities to urban and suburban spaces, people aren't going to be able to live the life that they want to live. And that's part of career, right? People want to live the life that they want to live. They want to work the way that they want to work. And that's a challenge in rural spaces when there's just limitation.
For employers, rural realities affect their hiring processes.
Rural hiring is different. It's a small town. I know everyone. So yeah, it influences my hiring. This community is smaller than some of the bigger centers I've worked in. So, we have a smaller workforce compared to larger centers. Just the atmosphere is more like, a small family, right?
Rural realities can also impact the work available to the community, sometimes creating too much limitation.
I think one of the things we'd benefit most from would be for the local economy to diversify into some lighter duty, less safety-oriented opportunities. Like, we're very resource center-based, right? We're forestry, we're logging, we're mining, and we don't even have a robust retail center here. COVID really decimated hospitality, and it reduced the diversity of businesses in the community. We've had a few, but not a profound amount. But everybody's towing the line so close that additional hiring or hiring where they think that the workload is going to get actually increased by having that worker there, I think ends up being a barrier.
How would rural communities benefit from a more diverse economy?
The opportunities are endless when you start growing that economy. And I'm no expert on the economy, but it benefits everybody when you can have more things like that, because not only do you get it for like your fun recreational things or like your food or what have you, you also get to explore what you might be interested in terms of jobs. And like, you get to be more authentic because you can have a job that represents your interests a little better. When you have more of these things, you get more tourism, you get more money coming in, and then your community can only be improved by that, because then you get more money for more like recreational things. You could get a new park put in that is accessible. You could have more accessibility features added. The more we can like support the incoming of like a more diverse economy, a more diverse like job sector and things like that, the more we can support the togetherness, I guess, of all of these groups.
And in rural areas, it can be hard to leave a bad first impression in the past.
We get labeled as kids, right? We're a small community. There's 300 or 400 kids in the school system here. So, they label you right from the get-go. And the school labels you, so once you get labeled in the elementary school, you go to the middle school, they keep those labels on you. They don't give you the opportunities, and you go to the high school, and they're already waiting for you, and they're already planning how they're going to deal with you. So the kids don't get a chance to actually grow. They don't get a chance to explore. And maybe those kids, maybe they are our entrepreneurs, but we'll never know because we don't give them the opportunity to explore that.
On the flip side, the smallness of a community can facilitate closer interpersonal bonds.
But I really do believe in timing, and it takes a village to raise a heart and a human. I don't know that you could restructure this very purpose in a city. You know, this is a small community, and yeah, 90% of people who have lived here for 40 years. They know everybody. The community is great, and when you've been known by everyone your whole life, like, they're not special. They're treated just like you and me, and that's what's so good about this community. Everyone's just human.
I think that there is a deeper understanding and probably more support in a small community with people with diverse abilities. But sometimes I'm not certain it's the right type of support. Sometimes I think it's more pity than it is support.
Rural communities face their own unique challenges and barriers to inclusion that more urban centers either don't experience or have easier access to solutions. We need individuals, workplaces, and service providers to all be aware of the realities of rural living to be part of the solution for your community. There are many challenges faced by rural residents that can have an impact on employment success. Unreliable transportation, economic and financial difficulties, navigating workplace relationships, and the smallness of rural communities all play a role in one's employment. Time after time, research participants spoke to the importance of strong community bonds. But how do rural areas work together to build a strong, vibrant community?
I humbly acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the stolen, unceded traditional territory of the Puyallup and Chiquayak nations.
Diversity Disconnect is funded by the Government of Canada. To learn more about the research, visit freereignassociates.ca/diversity-disconnect or check out the links in our show notes. The Diversity Disconnect podcast is hosted by Mallory Tomlinson and produced by Megan Boekhorst. Our audio engineer is Tim McAlpine. Guests include Desiree Carlson, Cassie Taylor, Madeleine Warkentin, and Emily White. This episode featured Megan Boekhorst as Jordan, Diana King as Shane, Peter Bailey as George, and Harmony Toth as Alex. The Diversity Disconnect podcast was developed by Free Reign Associates and Life Strategies.